when Sylvia Quinn, a quiet historical researcher, stumbled upon an abandoned Cold War bunker after a violent storm. She expected nothing more than old concrete and rusted cans. Instead, she found a sealed briefcase, a forgotten name, and a tape-recorded confession to a crime that had been buried for over 60 years. This isn't just a story about a bunker. It's a story about betrayal, redemption, and a woman who gave voice to the dead. Stay with us. What's inside will shock you. But before we dive in, tell us where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. The wind carried a whisper across the high cliffs of northern Oregon, where time seemed to slow down and the sea spoke in rhythms older than memory. For Sylvia Quinn, this was exactly where she was meant to be. After years of academic noise, deadlines, and the clamor of museums and lecture halls, she had traded all of it for silence, for space to breathe, to feel, to remember. Sylvia was in her early 30s, a historical researcher with a heart full of quiet storms. Her once polished boots were now scuffed with salt and dirt, and her hands had long forgotten the feel of keyboard clicks. She'd inherited this battered coastal cabin from a grandmother she barely knew, a woman wrapped in mystery and half-whispered tales. The house stood alone on a fog-kissed bluff, its gray siding faded, and its windows like tired eyes watching the sea. But it was hers, and that was enough. Her only company was Milo, a 10-year-old Labrador mix with a limp from some long-forgotten injury and eyes full of wisdom. Together, they wandered the wild edges of land and memory, not searching for anything until the storm came, until the earth cracked open and gave up a secret it had kept for more than 60 years. The storm came with little warning, sweeping in off the Pacific like a vengeful memory. By nightfall, the rain pounded Sylvia's cabin in relentless waves, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. The power had long since gone, plunging the house into darkness, save for the flickering glow of a fire she managed to coax into the hearth. Milo lay curled at her feet, his ears twitching with every distant crash of thunder. Sylvia sat in an old rocking chair passed down from some forgotten aunt, the kind of chair that creaked like it had secrets of its own. Outside, branches snapped like brittle bones. The land groaned. She felt the storm not just in her bones, but in her blood. It was nearly dawn when the worst of it passed. She stepped out into the cold hush of a post-storm morning. The air was electric, the world soaked in gray light. The damage was evident: fallen limbs, ripped shingles, and something that made her breath catch in her throat. The giant spruce in the middle of the garden, the one her grandmother always called the family sentinel, had fallen. Its roots, gnarled and ancient, had been ripped from the ground like old wounds torn open. A crater of churned earth and shattered roots yawned before her. Milo bounded toward it, nose low, tail up. He barked once, twice, then gave a strange, urgent whine. He began to dig. "Probably chasing a rabbit," Sylvia murmured, stepping toward him. But something in Milo's body language made her stop. This wasn't the distracted digging of a dog after a scent. This was focused, purposeful. He barked again, louder now, then pawed furiously at something half-buried behind a thick tangle of exposed roots. Sylvia crouched beside him and began to clear away the wet soil with her hands. The earth was cold, dense, reluctant to give up its truth. But eventually she saw it. Metal, rusted, but unmistakably man-made. A corner, a seam, a wheel, a hatch. Sylvia stared. The cold wind bit at her skin. But she didn't move. Her heart pounded louder than the fading thunder. This wasn't an old septic lid or some forgotten storm drain. This was heavy steel, set deep, too deliberate to be anything mundane. A Cold War relic, a hidden shelter. Why here? She reached out and touched the wheel handle. It didn't budge. Milo sat beside her now, silent, as if understanding they were on the edge of something far bigger than either of them. Back inside, she changed into dry clothes, grabbed a thermos of hot tea, and returned with tools WD-40, a pry bar, a hammer, and a crowbar passed down through generations. The storm had awakened something in her too, not fear, but purpose. It took hours. She sprayed the hinges, waited, hit them with the hammer, wedged the pry bar under the wheel and leaned in with her full weight. The hatch groaned like an ancient door reluctant to betray its secret. Then finally a pop, a hiss, the smell of mildew, dust, and something older still. She stepped back, heart thudding. The hatch creaked open with a sound like the sigh of buried time. A stairway stretched down into blackness, steep concrete steps vanishing into the earth. Sylvia looked at Milo. Stay. The dog let out a low, uncertain whine, but obeyed, sitting at the edge like a sentry. She clicked on her flashlight, took a breath that felt like a farewell to her old life, and descended. The air inside was thick, heavy with silence and rot. Her footsteps echoed. Cobwebs brushed her shoulders. The beam of her light revealed a rectangular room, bare walls, a desk, a chair, shelves empty but for dust. Then she saw it. A small object tucked beneath the desk. Her light caught the olive hue of metal and the faded yellow of stenciled letters. A military ammo box. She pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. She sat in the chair, wooden, warped, and opened it. Inside was a single item, a leather-bound journal. It was old, the cover cracked with age, the pages yellowed. She turned to the first page and stopped. The handwriting was fine, deliberate. The name at the top chilled her. Quinn. Her grandmother's initials. Sylvia spent hours underground, devouring page after page. What began as household notations, weather reports, food rations, lists of repairs slowly became something darker. The journal shifted in tone. Her grandmother had been part of something secret. She wrote about a partnership with two others only identified as V and C. There were vague references to the project, securing the asset and unacceptable risk. Then fear. One entry, dated November 1962, read, C wants full control. V and I disagree. This place was meant to protect, not hide. I no longer trust him. Sylvia felt her breath catch. There had been betrayal, a secret, and something still here beneath the garden, beneath the quiet life her grandmother had so carefully constructed. The bunker hadn't just been a shelter. It was a vault built to hide something far more dangerous than canned beans and Geiger counters. She closed the journal, her fingers trembling. She wasn't just uncovering history. She was excavating guilt, legacy, a buried inheritance soaked in silence. When she emerged, the sky was overcast. Milo met her at the top step, pressing his head into her side. She sat in the grass, journal in hand, staring at the hatch like it might swallow her whole. She came to the coast for peace. What she found was the weight of a secret kept for over half a century. And she knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The next morning, Sylvia sat at the kitchen table with the journal open in front of her. The kettle hissed on the stove, untouched. Her tea had long since gone cold, but she hadn't noticed. Her eyes scanned and rescanned the same paragraph. Again and again. We secured the contents in the wall. West side, 12 feet from the corner, 5 feet up. The measurements are exact. No one but the three of us know it's there. And if anything happens to me, God forgive us. The west side, 12 feet. A hidden compartment. Sylvia looked toward the hatch just outside her window. The bunker had been built to store more than secrets. It had been built to bury them. She stood, grabbed her tools again, and called to Milo. He followed her with slow, watchful steps, sensing the rising tension in the air. Back underground. The air felt colder, staler. The silence was thicker than before. She walked the length of the west wall, measuring each step carefully. 12 feet. Then she knelt, flashlight beam flickering over bare concrete. At first glance, it looked the same as every other part of the room, but she knew better. She tapped it. Solid. Then again, this time lower, a deeper, hollower tone answered her knock. She pressed her hand flat against the wall, trying to feel a seam, a shift, a break in the surface. Nothing. Milo watched, ears perked. When she stepped back and raised the sledgehammer, he let out a low, questioning whine. "I have to try," Sylvia whispered. The first swing sent a crack splintering across the wall. The second brought down dust and a shallow chip of concrete. With each hit, the sound echoed like cannon fire. Her arms shook, but she kept going, anger and adrenaline pushing her forward. Then it happened. The hammer connected with a different kind of sound, a crunch. Not concrete. Something behind it. She dropped the hammer and scraped at the crumbling edge with gloved hands. Bit by bit, the wall gave way, revealing a small, rectangular cavity. And inside it a briefcase. Brown leather, old but intact. Brass corners dulled by age. No markings. Sylvia pulled it free and clutched it to her chest, her breath catching as if she'd unearthed a live grenade. Whatever was inside had been buried here for decades, protected like something sacred or dangerous. She climbed the stairs with trembling legs, Milo never more than a step behind. Back in the kitchen, she placed the briefcase gently on the table as though afraid it might disappear. The brass latches groaned but clicked open. The smell that escaped was unmistakable old paper, preserved leather, and something metallic. Inside lay three things: a stack of documents bundled in twine, a 7-inch reel-to-reel audio tape in a plain cardboard box dated October 1963, a small envelope sealed with red wax. Sylvia reached for the documents first. Her fingers shook as she untied the twine. The papers were delicate, their edges browned with age, but their contents were astonishing. Stock certificates, deeds, foreign banking statements. The total value staggering, beyond anything Sylvia could comprehend. Offshore accounts, properties in New York, Canada, Switzerland, all tied to a single name she had never seen before. Daniel Mercer? Not her grandmother, not the initials from the journal. Someone entirely new. Her brow furrowed. Who was Daniel Mercer? She opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. To whom it may concern. If you're reading this, then the storm came, and the roots broke. And you found what we spent our lives trying to bury. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was the fourth partner, the silent one, the forgotten one, and I suppose, the betrayed one. This case holds proof of what was taken from me and how it was hidden. My life's work, my fortune, my name. I was never supposed to be erased, but they erased me anyway. There's a tape. Please listen to it. And then you'll understand. Sylvia stared at the signature. This man wasn't in the journal. Not once. V. C and E, M, Q, but no D, M. Why? Who was he? Was her grandmother part of a cover-up? Was this about money or something far darker? She stared at the reel-to-reel tape. Her home didn't have a player, but the bunker's old military radio console might. She looked at Milo. "Come on, boy. We're not done." Inside the bunker again. She powered on the ancient console. It buzzed, then hummed. A soft orange glow blinked to life. Sylvia threaded the tape carefully, then hit play. A sharp click, then static, then a voice. A man's dry, brittle, hollow. "If you're hearing this, then you've found the truth. I don't know who you are, but I hope you're kinder than the ones who left me behind." Sylvia froze. The voice was haunting, calm, but heavy with a sadness that could crush bone. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I was the engineer, the numbers guy, the one who built the shelter, and the one they left out of the story. They called themselves protectors, patriots. But when the project became profitable, really profitable, they turned on me, said I wasn't trustworthy, said I didn't belong. They kept the money, they kept the glory, and they kept the lie. One of them, Emily Quinn, helped me hide the truth. She wasn't like the others. She regretted it all. She tried to make it right. This briefcase, this bunker, it's her apology. I don't want revenge. I just don't want to be forgotten." The tape ended with silence, and Sylvia's hands were shaking. Back at the kitchen table, she stared out the window. The journal and documents spread around her. The truth was far bigger than a hidden fortune. Her grandmother had lived with guilt for decades, haunted not just by what was done, but by what was hidden. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a reckoning, and someone else would want to keep it buried. At that moment, Milo stood up sharply and let out a deep, low growl. Sylvia turned. Through the window, a black SUV was rolling slowly down the gravel path toward her cabin. "Unmarked!" Windows tinted. Her blood ran cold. The SUV came to a slow, calculated stop near the edge of Sylvia's property, its engine humming like a held breath. No one got out at first. The windows remained dark, impenetrable. Milo's growl deepened low and primal. Sylvia felt the hairs on her neck rise. She stepped back from the window slowly, her fingers tightening around the back of a chair. Her mind raced. Whoever they were. They didn't come for tea, not unannounced, not in a blacked-out vehicle after the discovery she'd just made. Then movement. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-40s. Sharp suit. Expensive overcoat despite the mud. Not local. His posture was confident, too. Confident for someone unfamiliar with the land. He stood for a moment, scanning the house, then looked directly at her through the window, and smiled. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile predators wear just before the kill. She backed away. When the knock came, it was gentle, too gentle, a warning in disguise. She didn't answer. The man spoke anyway. "Miss Quinn, my name is Julian Cross. I believe you found something that doesn't belong to you." His voice was polished, cultured, but there was an edge beneath it, like glass under velvet. She said nothing. "Let's not make this unpleasant," he continued. "I'm just here for what's mine. Or rather, what was promised to my family a very long time ago." Sylvia swallowed hard. The journal, the briefcase, the tape, all of it. She whispered, "Milo, stay!" The dog stood, his body tense but waiting for her cue. She walked to the door but didn't open it. "You need to leave. This is private land." Julian chuckled. "So was the bunker. Yet here we are." There was a beat of silence. Then he leaned in, voice dropping to something colder. "Let me be clear. I don't care about the tape. I don't care about Mercer's sob story. What I care about, what I'm here for, is the asset. The one hidden behind that wall you so kindly cracked open." Sylvia's breath caught. How did he know? No one had been here. She hadn't posted anything, hadn't called anyone. Unless the storm, the tree, they'd been watching. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. "There is no asset, just papers, and a name your grandfather tried to erase." Julian's tone sharpened. "My grandfather built that bunker, funded the project. That fortune was meant for the three of them. Mercer was an outsider. He was lucky to be included. But when he got greedy, he didn't get greedy. Sylvia cut in, surprising even herself. He got betrayed." A long pause. "Then that's a shame." She heard retreating footsteps, brief silence, then the unmistakable crunch of gravel as the SUV pulled away. But the dread didn't leave her chest, because she knew he'd be back. And next time, he wouldn't knock. That night, she didn't sleep. She stayed in the kitchen with the briefcase beside her, the tape now locked in a steel toolbox she found in the shed. Her phone had no signal, of course. She was alone. Miles from the nearest neighbor, just her and Milo. And the truth. A truth someone was willing to threaten to keep buried. Milo curled up near the door, ears twitching at every creak, every rustle of wind. He didn't sleep either. Sylvia's mind drifted to her grandmother, Emily Quinn. The lines in her journal were filled with guilt, but also courage. She had tried, in her own quiet way, to preserve the truth, to leave a breadcrumb trail for someone, maybe anyone, willing to listen. Now it was up to her. She opened the journal again, flipping to the back where her grandmother had once scribbled random numbers notes that didn't make sense. Until now, grid coordinates. She began to trace them on the property map, matching distances to walls, to steps, to the bunker's perimeter. The pattern that emerged was chilling 3 locations, triangulated. Not to hide something, to point at something, and all arrows led to the briefcase. Her grandmother hadn't just hidden the evidence. She'd left a map in plain sight, as if to say, find this, and protect it. Just before dawn, headlights returned. But this time, they didn't stop at the edge of the property. They drove straight up the lane. Milo barked sharply. Sylvia grabbed the crowbar from beside the door, breath frozen in her chest. 3 silhouettes stepped out of the SUV. One was Julian. The other 2 were larger, silent, clearly muscle. No more smiles, no more subtlety. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a demand. Julian stepped forward. "This is your last chance, Miss Quinn." Sylvia didn't open the door, but she spoke. "If you take one more step, I will not be the one you need to worry about." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," she said. And then, from behind her, a click, the sound of a shotgun being pumped. They all turned. Standing behind Sylvia was Sheriff Dean Lawson, a retired Marine, and the closest thing to law this part of the coast she had called him the night before, using the landline hidden beneath a false drawer her grandmother once showed her when she was 8. "Step off her land," Dean growled. "Now." Julian's goons hesitated. Milo stood at Sylvia's side, his growl now guttural. Julian adjusted his coat, gave a forced smile, and said, "This isn't over." He turned and walked away. As the SUV disappeared again into the trees, Dean turned to Sylvia. "You've stirred up something deep," he said. "I didn't stir it," she replied, holding up the journal. "I just finally read it." That morning, she placed everything in a sealed crate, the briefcase, the tape, the journal, the coordinates, and handed it to Dean. "This needs to go to the state archives, or federal, somewhere safe." He nodded. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know. she said, "but it won't be here. Not anymore." Milo wagged his tail once, like he already knew they were leaving. As she packed the last of her belongings, Sylvia walked once more to the spot where the great spruce had fallen. The pit was still there, raw, scarred. This place had hidden a secret for over 60 years. But it had given it up now, and with it, her illusion of a peaceful past. What she had instead was something far more real clarity, and a quiet, cold fire to protect the truth, even if it meant burning everything else down. The old cabin stood quiet behind her, its faded shingles catching the morning light like tired skin. Sylvia looked back once, just once, before turning the key in the lock for the final time. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she wasn't staying either. The truth had been unearthed, exposed like roots from the fallen spruce. She had spent her entire adult life digging into other people's history, other people's legacies. Now, for the first time, she had to decide what to do with her own. The briefcase was gone, turned over to authorities with full documentation. The state attorney's office had taken her testimony. The sheriff had backed every word, and the evidence. It spoke for itself. The truth of what Daniel Mercer had built and what had been stolen was now a matter of public record. Julian Cross and his partners were being investigated. But Sylvia knew justice didn't always come in handcuffs. Sometimes, justice was clarity. Sometimes, it was choosing not to be silent when everyone else had been. She drove south with Milo curled in the passenger seat, his head resting on the doorframe as the pines blurred past. Her grandmother's journal lay on the dash, the pages now dog-eared, smudged with dirt, and ink-streaked with emotion. For weeks after the incident, Sylvia had received letters from lawyers, from archivists, from journalists wanting her to appear on morning shows or sign a book deal. She'd ignored them all. Fame had never been the goal. She just wanted truth. But one envelope caught her attention not because of what it asked, but because of what it offered. It was from a historical institute in Montana, tucked away near Glacier National Park, a private nonprofit, funded quietly, working to preserve Cold War relics, oral testimonies, and hidden histories that might otherwise rot in basements or be rewritten by power. The letter was simple. "We heard what you uncovered. We believe stories like this deserve careful stewardship. If you ever wish to help tell more, our doors are open." There was no offer of money, no promise of publicity, just purpose. Sylvia took the long road camping with Milo in backwoods pullouts, making instant coffee in tin mugs, and breathing in the dry, honest air of autumn. Each sunrise felt cleaner, each night quieter. And yet, in the silence, something stirred a desire not to escape history, but to honor it. When they arrived at the Institute, the main building was a refurbished ranger station, pine-framed, modest, tucked beneath the arms of a glacier-fed ridge. Inside, walls lined with relics maps, decoded transmissions, old Soviet survival kits, and in one glass case a single Geiger counter with a note that read, "The war that never happened," but nearly did. The director was a soft-spoken man named Ethan Wells, with graying hair and kind eyes that held the fatigue of someone who'd read too many forgotten truths. He didn't ask for the sensational version. He simply sat across from her in a wide, sun-lit office and said, "Tell me everything." And she did. What started as a temporary position became something more. She began digitizing hundreds of taped interviews, curating survivor stories, translating decades-old letters from families who had been silenced, exiled, or erased. And in the quiet hours, she wrote. Not about herself, but about Daniel Mercer, about the man whose name had been erased from records, the engineer who'd been betrayed by those he called brothers. She wrote about the briefcase, the bunker, and the betrayal not as a scandal, but as a human story, full of ambition, greed, regret, and finally, redemption. The Institute offered to publish it under her name, but she refused. Publish it under she said, Daniel Mercer. He deserves to be remembered. Winter came early in Montana. The mountains went white, and the trees stood still as if holding their breath. One night, after filing away a newly discovered letter from a retired Air Force pilot. Sylvia stood outside with Milo, watching the stars. For the first time in months, her chest didn't feel heavy. "I think she would have liked this place," she whispered, thinking of her grandmother. Milo thumped his tail gently. "Yeah, I miss her too." She had not forgiven everything. There were parts of Emily Quinn's silence that still stung. But through the journal, through the careful construction of the bunker, through that briefcase, Sylvia had seen what quiet remorse looked like. Not all apologies are loud. Some are built into walls. Months later, she received a call from a young woman named Lucia Reyes, Daniel Mercer's granddaughter. She had only recently learned the full truth. Sylvia met her at a coffee shop in Spokane, halfway between their two lives. Lucia brought a photo. It was grainy, faded, but full of warmth. 4 men standing together in front of the newly built bunker. One of them, Mercer, had a hand on Sylvia's grandmother's shoulder. They were all smiling. Before everything changed? "I didn't know what to expect," Lucia said, holding back tears. "But I never expected someone like you to fight for someone like him." Sylvia smiled gently. "I wasn't fighting for him," she said. "I was fighting with him." As she and Milo drove back up the ridge that night, she realized something. The bunker had been a burial site for the truth. But it had become something else. A birthplace. For a new legacy. One not built on secrecy, but on remembering. Winter was long and quiet in the Montana Valley. The kind of quiet Sylvia Quinn had once mistaken for peace, until she'd learned that silence could carry ghosts. Now, as the snow gathered thick on the roof of her modest cabin near the Institute, Sylvia spent her days immersed in the lives of people she would never meet. Cold transcripts, forgotten tape reels, stories that had been tucked away like bones under old floorboards. But every once in a while, a voice cut through the static so clean, so raw, that it felt like time rewound. And sometimes those voices weren't from the tapes. One evening, near the anniversary of the day she'd opened that cursed bunker, Sylvia received a letter. It was handwritten, no return address. Just her name, no title, no formal greeting. Inside was one line. "You gave back what was never yours, and in doing so, you gave something no one else ever did. You listened." Beneath it, pressed into the corner of the paper, was the old insignia from the Mercer Engineering Group, long since defunct. She stared at it for a long time. Milo sat beside her, tail still, eyes locked on her face, as if he too sensed the weight of the moment. Sylvia didn't know who had sent it. Lucia, someone from the Reyes family, a former partner, an anonymous conscience. But she knew what it meant. Some debts, when repaid, echo louder than the ones left unpaid. Weeks passed. The snow melted. Spring came reluctantly, as it always did in the mountains, hesitant, fragile, beautiful. And with it came an idea Sylvia couldn't ignore. The bunker. Not the one in Oregon that had been sealed, permanently. The state had declared the site a historical archive, with access permitted only through special request. But Sylvia had the original blueprints. And the will, and the story. What if she could recreate it? Not as a shelter, but as a memorial. She brought the idea to Ethan Wells at the Institute. He was skeptical at first. "You want to rebuild a Cold War bunker?" he asked. "Why?" She looked out the window towards the pines, her voice soft. Because people keep forgetting. And forgetting is how it all starts again. Construction began in June. It wasn't a replica. Sylvia made sure of that. This one was open, bright, and lined with names not of soldiers or politicians, but of the people whose lives had been lost to silence. Engineers, whistleblowers, journalists, immigrants like Daniel Mercer, and women like her grandmother, who weren't heroes but weren't cowards either. They were people who tried to do something, even if too late. On the day of the opening, it rained. Sylvia stood at the entrance in a simple black coat, holding an umbrella in one hand and a worn photograph in the other. The photo, the one of the 4 original partners, Lucia Reyes stood beside her, hand in hand with her daughter Daniel Mercer's great-grandchild. As the ribbon was cut, and the first visitors entered the bunker-turned-museum, Sylvia stayed outside for a moment longer. She looked up at the mountains, at the clouds that still hadn't learned how to let go, and she whispered, "We didn't forget you." Later that night, back in her cabin, Sylvia built a fire. The soft crackle reminded her of Maine, of the storm, of the moment the earth gave up its secret. She sat on the rug, Milo curled at her feet. She reached for the last item she'd never turned in. It was tucked beneath the floorboard, just like her grandmother had taught her. The original letter from Daniel Mercer. Not the copy, not the transcript. The real one. She unfolded it, slowly, gently. She didn't read it. She just held it, and cried, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in her life, she felt like she had done something that mattered. Sometimes the truth doesn't come as a revelation. Sometimes it comes quietly through paper, through silence, through one woman who chose to listen when the world had already moved on. The following spring, when the first wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth, Sylvia returned to Oregon. She hadn't planned to. She'd told herself the story was finished, that the briefcase had been surrendered, the names remembered, the ghosts laid to rest. But grief has its own calendar, and healing doesn't send invitations. She parked her truck at the edge of the old bluff, where her grandmother's house had once stood. It was gone now, burned down in a controlled demolition by the state, after they sealed the bunker permanently. The land had been left untouched ever since, growing back in tufts of wild grass and pine saplings. But the earth still remembered. She walked with Milo at her side, his tail sweeping gently, his pace slow, older now, like her, but steady, loyal, unchanged. They reached the place where the great spruce once stood. The soil had settled, but the shape of the wound remained. A shallow depression, a quiet scar. Sylvia knelt there and ran her fingers through the dirt. Not to dig, not to unearth, but simply to feel. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat. Not a document, not an artifact. A letter, written in her own hand. Dear Daniel, I don't know if souls can hear, or if the dead care what the living say, but if there's any chance you're listening, then know this: you were never forgotten. You were buried but not erased. And now, your name lives in more hearts than just mine. Your story will be told not as a footnote, but as a foundation, the kind that changes people, the kind that matters. Thank you for trusting someone you would never meet. I hope we've done right by you. Rest now. Sylvia. She pressed the letter gently into the earth. No monument, no stone, just a few words, and the wind to carry them. Milo let out a quiet huff, then lay down beside her, head on his paws. The two of them stayed like that for minutes, maybe hours, not mourning anymore, just remembering. When they returned to Montana, there was a letter waiting for her. Another handwritten envelope, this one from a high school student in Maine. He'd visited the Cold War exhibit she'd helped build, read the plaque about Daniel Mercer, listened to his story through the preserved audio recording. He wrote, "I always thought history was just wars and dates, but your story made me realize it's about people and how we choose to remember them. I want to be someone who remembers. Thank you." Sylvia sat at her desk for a long time, the letter trembling in her hand. Sometimes we fight for justice. Other times we fight simply so the next generation knows where the bones are buried. 1 year after the day she opened the hatch, the Institute hosted a ceremony. They unveiled a memorial wall, the Lost Names Archive. Each name etched into the steel represented someone whose legacy had once been erased by fear, power, or silence. At the center of the wall, in bold letters, Daniel Mercer, 1924-1963. Truth doesn't rust when it is buried. It waits. Beneath it, carved in smaller type, Emily Quinn. She did not speak loudly, but she built a way for truth to be found. And below that, barely visible unless you leaned close, Sylvia Quinn and Milo, they listened. That night, as the crowd cleared and the lights dimmed, Sylvia remained behind. She stood alone in front of the wall, the weight of 100 stories pressing against her chest. Milo sat beside her, old but proud. And for the first time, Sylvia didn't feel like a historian. She felt like a guardian, not of secrets, but of truth. She looked up at the sky, her voice barely more than a breath. "We did it, Grandma." And in the stillness, beneath the stars, it felt like someone answered. Sylvia Quinn didn't set out to uncover a conspiracy or rewrite a piece of American history. She was simply looking for quiet. But in that silence, she found the voice of a man long erased, and the courage of a woman who had quietly carried regret for decades. This story reminds us that truth does not disappear. It waits. It hides in letters, in old journals, in the cracks of our families and the fractures of our past. And it takes brave, ordinary people to bring it back to light. Justice doesn't always come from courts or headlines. Sometimes it comes from listening, from standing in the rain at a forgotten grave, from choosing to speak for those who were silenced. What Sylvia learned and what we can all carry forward is this. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You just have to be honest. And when given the choice between forgetting and remembering, always choose to remember. The end? Up next, 2 more incredible journeys you won't want to miss. Click to keep walking with us and hit subscribe if you believe the truth is always worth uncovering.